San Diego State Sports Business MBA Director Scott Minto. Scott, thanks for joining us here on KOGO.
Great to have you. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, can you give our listeners an idea just how big fantasy football's become?
Well, leading experts assume that it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 33 million Americans and Canadians playing fantasy football every year, and in doing so, spending somewhere in the neighborhood of about $11 billion annually.
And now, that's a lot of money, obviously, and you break it down individually, and I guess it probably would be surprising to just talk to people individually to just find out how much money that they do spend.
Yeah, it's estimates range from somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 to $500 per year on fantasy prep, league admissions fees, all that kind of associated research that folks do, and they spend almost 8 hours a week on average, tinkering with their teams, getting ready for the draft, and updating based on injuries and all that kind of stuff. But it's a lot of money and a lot of time that folks are putting into this.
8 hours a week, I know how much you got to wonder how much a distraction fantasy football is in players' professional and personal lives.
It really does distract folks, but I think it can be something more than that. And I think office fantasy football can be a good thing for camaraderie and getting the office together and something to talk about at the water cooler on Monday other than business. It gets them kind of working together as a team, and although they may distract a little bit from the greater cause of the organization, it's certainly getting teamwork going together, which a lot of companies strive for.
Now, Scott, obviously fantasy football has to have the NFL playing for it to work. Does the NFL profit from fantasy football, and if so, how?
In some degree. Their main website, NFL.com, has its own fantasy platform. It is not one of the industry leaders, but it strives to be because it's the only one that has video highlights available. But the major players are ESPN, CBS, and Yahoo. And interestingly enough, those are the folks who broadcast the games. So it kind of makes sense for them to drive you to their fantasy platform that they build on their site. So you tune in on Thursday night, Sunday, and Monday night to watch the games when they actually come on.
Attending an NFL game these days, especially now in these new stadiums that are being built around the league, it really has become an interactive kind of experience, obviously picking up, I guess, on the fantasy football where fans are intimately involved in what is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. The Levi Stadium, who would open last year in Santa Clara, actually has an area sponsored by Yahoo, which is one of the leaders in fantasy. And down in Jacksonville, where their on-field product is not really all that much to watch, they actually have a fantasy lounge where you can go and update your team with Wi-Fi and watch the Red Zone channel instead of watching the Jaguars play live on the field. So I think that's a way to embrace what the public wants.
The NFL has become such a huge brand, and obviously fantasy football along with it. What do you think the future is for fantasy football?
You know what? It's all going toward the daily games. And ultimately, the future is going to be the legalization of sports betting around the country. Adam Silver was the first commissioner of the NBA to push for that and come out with an op-ed in the New York Times saying we need to legalize and regulate sports gambling. But these daily games get through because they're games of skill and not games of chance. So things like FanDuel and DraftKings are worth almost $100 billion apiece in terms of investment. And you have fans winning, but you have people investing real money in these daily fantasy games, which are even more lucrative because of the turnover than a league-wide, a year-long fantasy football type of a game.
Great insight. Really appreciate you joining us today to give our listeners a chance to really get kind of inside fantasy football and what is happening in its impact on people's pocketbooks, their lives, and the NFL. Scott Minto, the San Diego State Sports Business MBA Director, live here on San Diego's News at